So if you're wondering if Proud Mary is as bad as people are saying, it's probably worse. I think people are being even too kind to the movie, but I think also some people aren't recognizing there was potential here for a good movie based on the same premise. I think some people are saying this movie is just inherently doomed and it's a terrible idea all around. No, I think there are some scenes and there are some interactions where you see that had they made some different decisions and maybe a different director, some different choices, this could have actually been a pretty cool movie. So do I think that Taraji Henson just can't pull off this action hero role? She's the lead in this. No, I think that we don't know that yet. We don't have enough information. I do think that people who assume, Taraji Henson, great actress, she was great in Hidden Figures. Everyone was great in that movie. She was my favorite. One scene made me tear up a little. I'm not afraid to admit it. So she's a great actress, but I think a lot of people assume that just because she's a great actress, that automatically means she can do action hero movie roles. And people seem to look down on action movies a little bit and say, well, if you can act in an action movie, or if you can act in a dramatic role, of course you can act in an action movie. It's a lesser, easier role. But I think that's totally wrong. I think there's a specific set of skills that you need to be an action hero movie star. And just like no one would argue that just because someone can act in action movies, then they're automatically going to be good at other dramatic roles. No one would argue that. I think it's the same that just because someone can do great in dramatic roles, that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be able to pull off being a believable action star. And in Proud Mary, Henson has one scene at the end where you could say she kicks ass. And it's a great action scene, and I think she does a good job in it. I think whoever choreographed the scene and whoever set up the shots did a great job. It's a great action scene. But for the rest of the movie, people were like, oh, she kicks ass in this movie, she's a badass in the movie. She's not. She has no physical hand-to-hand combat. She shoots a few people, but for the most part, it's just her talking and not really showing her action movie chops. So we don't really know. It's still, I'd say, an open question of whether she can really pull off being the star of an action hero movie. And then also, I think they did her a disservice by what they did with her character. Her character seemed very emotional, very squeamish about violence and very upset by it, very nurturing, very motherly. And I get that that was the point, but I think that's a very hard thing to pull off, that personality, and then also saying someone's this ruthless badass assassin. I compare it to Atomic Blonde, which came out. Charlize Theron totally pulls it off, but she's very cold, calculating, ruthless, and then things happen where you start to see her somewhat develop some feelings and develop a conscience, or at least the start of it, but they don't make the whole movie where she's just this weepy, emotional person. So I just think she would have been better as an action hero in this movie if they made her at least a little more gruff and a little harder and a little more cold even. I think she was just too much just like a normal person who's, appalled by torture, but then it's like, why are you part of this crime family? And I get it, it's because they adopted her and she feels loyalty to the crime family, but nonetheless, I just don't buy that she would have been in this family for all these years, committed all these acts of violence, and just be so emotional, such an emotional wreck when there's, torture around her. And I think similar to how some superhero movies, they take someone like Peter Parker and they're like, look, once he gets bitten by a radioactive spider and has superheroes, he can be just as brave and just as honorable and just as much of a badass as all those jocks out there and all those people in the military, even though he's scrawny. But that's a superhero movie, that's a fantasy, and that's why it's so compelling. I feel like they did the same thing where they said, look, if you're a middle-aged woman who has kids and makes some sandwiches and is just a normal mother, nurturing type, you can be just as much as a badass as someone who's the psychopathic killer who spends all day doing nothing but killing people. You can, do just as good at killing as him and still be just a normal, well-adjusted person with a son. And I guess that, that's a cool fantasy, but I don't think that's actually the reality where a lot of the people in these crime families, a lot of these assassins, well, they're just normal, nurturing, mothering types. No, a lot of them are very cold-blooded, I think. So if you made this movie and marketed it as more of kind of a fantasy, even not a superhero because she doesn't have superheroes, but kind of the superhero fantasy genre, then I'd believe it, but it was marketed with an eye towards realism and really feeling the emotions of these characters, and I feel like it didn't work. And I think the movie could have had her being this badass assassin, being ruthless, killing these people, and then have it kind of funny that this is happening at the same time as she's getting in these petty arguments over grounding this adopted son. I think it could have been a very funny, campy movie where it's more funny, kind of like Big Daddy meets any kind of crime spy movie. But I feel like the movie tried to make it very heartfelt and emotional the entire movie, so you couldn't really, it just came across as weird that, oh really, it's like oh, don't go in my bedroom. Oh no, you went in my bedroom. Oh, you found all my all my guns, and now you might shoot yourself or someone else. It was too much. It seemed like the setup for some kind of sitcom-y, funny, really spoofy, campy movie rather than, no, this is actually realistic and this would happen. And I think if they made the movie, oh, here there's this badass female assassin and she's very tough and very ruthless. Suddenly she's stuck with this kid from the streets and he's very rude to her and they're kind of having this back and forth and she's trying to whip him into shape. And then slowly she starts to develop feelings and a real bond for him. This kind of triggers her to wanting to stop killing people and maybe get out of the life. Maybe that would have been an interesting story, and I think that it could have worked. And you got some scenes like that when he's like, what happened to the door? And she's like, well, it got off trying to save your ass. And he's like, well, why'd you take so long? And just this kind of gruff back and forth that I thought could be kind of funny. And again, either kind of a nice heartfelt message that where she starts being more of a hard ass, but then something about him starts to trigger a little bit of emotional feelings in her, but not too much. Or it could have just been this funny kind of comedy movie. Okay, so I've talked about conceptually why I don't think the movie worked and what they could have done different. As far as the actual execution of the movie, it was very bad. We start off with a scene where she's wearing a blonde wig and she's kind of gearing up to go kill this person. And there's the music playing and then she kills him with a silencer. And you get all these elements where you think it's going to be kind of a spy assassin movie where people are dressing up and there's different outfits and there's different cool weapons. But then we see none of that at all. We don't see any real cool weapons. We don't see any dressing up or disguises. So that dropped off the map completely because it's not an assassin movie at all. It's really more of a drama within this crime family. And the worst part of that was Danny Glover. The whole movie, he's the head of this family, and they seem to be trying to make him seem like kind of a good, nice guy. So I guess later down the line, when he shows a bit of ruthlessness, you're like shocked by it. But I guess for anyone who watches these kind of crime family movies, you assume that the people in these crime families, yeah, they're pretty ruthless people. So the whole movie, you're just kind of wondering, why does Danny Glover seem so nice? It's kind of weird. And then when he shows a bit of ruthlessness, you're like, yeah, of course he's ruthless. He's the head of this big crime family. And all the intrigue is based around her trying to get out of this crime family. And she seems to be shocked that she's not able to just effortlessly get out and go live a different life. And she's the only one. Anyone who's ever knows anything about crime families, that's the first thing you learn. It's not easy to get out. Once you're in for life. And I will say Billy Brown is the son of Danny Glover. He was the only one in the movie that came across as really menacing. I really bought that he would be part of this big criminal organization. I thought he did a great job. I want to say that. And I'll also say the look and feel of the movie, it just didn't feel premium. It didn't feel like it had a big budget and money behind it, which is fine if you have a avant-garde movie that's more experimental. Sometimes you don't want that big studio feel. But if you have a movie that's very simple premise, that's very generic, and then it also feels like there's not a lot of money behind it and it's kind of poorly shot and poorly done, recipe for disaster. And then some people are saying one of the reasons this movie did poorly is because the company didn't promote it, and one of the things they cite as evidence is that it wasn't screened in advance for critics, it went straight to theaters. I think that there might be some truth to those arguments, but I think it's a bad argument when they say, oh, well, because they didn't screen for theaters, didn't screen to critics, because I think almost certainly this would have gotten very negative reviews from critics, even if it was screened in advance. I don't think that would have changed the Rotten Tomatoes score that it gotten. So they wouldn't want to do that because, as they say in all these, well, the Rotten Tomatoes score, it sometimes shows up when people buy tickets. So if they got positive reviews, then maybe more people would have gone to see it. But it wouldn't have gotten positive reviews. And I think that that's one of the reasons they didn't want to screen for critics, because it would have done even worse. Okay, bottom line, this is a really bad movie. It's 2018, but I would put this in top 10 worst movies of 2017 list easily. So it's a bad movie, but I don't think that means Henson can't be an action movie hero star. I think that's still up in the air. I don't think this means we can never have a movie where there's a woman and she's an assassin and she's raising this adopted child. I think that could be an interesting dynamic. It can't be done in this way. How they tried to do it in this way was a failure. But I think there's potential for maybe a similar kind of movie to work. They just needed to do some different things and maybe iron a few things out.